be joined by Peter Smyth. Peter looks after all of the research at Sport Ireland, and in the news this morning was the fact that the Sport Ireland research into our activity, our physical movement over the course of the lockdown, has revealed that more of us are doing more. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Rob. Good afternoon.
The figures on the top line look really impressive. What were the ones that stood out from your perspective, having seen a number of these coming through down the years?
I think I'll give you three, if I may, but perhaps just it would be useful to put this stuff just in a little bit of context. We've been doing this for about 13, 14 years, so since 2007 or thereabouts. And the one thing that I know about these figures is that they tend to be exceptionally stable across years. So you will be surprised if you get a change in percent of maybe 2% year on year in terms of any of these measures. So in that context, when you look at what's happened, for example, around recreational walking. So if we took this time last year, we had about 66% of adults reporting that they were taking part in at least one recreational walk a week. That number is now gone up to 83%. That's 17%, 17 people in every 100. That's equivalent to about 650,000 more adults taking part in very healthy walking. So that to me is an extraordinary figure. And I think we use the word unprecedented, and certainly in my experience, it is totally unprecedented. Looking at sort of the other end of the scale, so if we look at the idea of those who are not taking part in either walking or in sport, so they're doing neither activity on an ongoing basis. And the sports policy, I think, has set an objective to reduce that figure from 22% to 15% over a 10-year period, which again would have considered to be a good achievement. It's now at 11%. So from last year. So we've had a halving of that. So, I mean, yeah, what we're seeing are extraordinary, unprecedented sort of levels of engagement in activity by the Irish population, which is just fantastic to see.
I think they are unprecedented times in many different ways, but at least this is one positive that we can take out of it. Do you think, is it something that has been building? Is it something that we knew inherently that we should be doing? Or are we so obedient that when the government tells us we can leave our houses to exercise for an hour in a 2-kilometre zone, that we just go and we do that because there's nothing else to do out there?
Yeah, I suppose the answer is it's a combination of some of those things. The first thing we know that when we look at the sort of things that stop people from being active, the main thing is their perception of time. Actually, not just a perception, but their experience of time. So people are busy, they're commuting long hours to work, they're working long hours, they're obviously got a lot of domestic responsibilities and so on. And a lot of those things have been taken away from people. So they had a fair amount of spare time, and probably for parents, interesting enough, they probably have a lot of kids at home as well. And there's probably sort of a need to perhaps break the day up and so on. So we're seeing, for example, the situation where those 35 to 44-year-olds with kids in the house are actually sort of significantly more active than if they don't have kids. So I suspect that's parents who are not alone getting out of the house, perhaps sometimes to escape each other and the kids, but are also bringing the kids out as well, because there's a lot of, you see it, this sort of family cycles and engagement on green spaces and so on. So I think that's one element. I think another element is this idea that, I think there has been over the last number of years a sort of the motivation for people being active is driven primarily by things like health, well-being, fitness, and actually women get it, I think, better than men, which in some respects I think helps to explain why we've seen such a narrowing in the gender gap over the years, and which now is effectively gone. Remember, in 2007, the gender gap in sports participation was 15%. Now it's 0 at the moment. So it's quite a profound shift. And it's probably a shift in a lot of aspects of society and a shift in perceptions around things. And I think it's that women, as I said, tend to seem to get the idea of the benefits of being active and so on.
Okay.
As to the government's
areas that we've spoken about before is in the social gradient, and the fact that there is a fairly direct line that you can write through standard of education or attainment of education and the ability and to get the physical movement side of it. Has that shifted at all in this latest period, or were we able to go deep enough into the numbers?
We're somewhat limited in the current context to understand this, but what we do know is certainly we've some information by social class. We haven't got any information by, for example, income or education, really. But by social class, the gradient seems to have been pretty stable, which suggests that, there is a little bit of a rising tide, but there's no narrowing of the gap as we see it at the moment. Just to say, that's something we will be looking at, because we're going to expand the reach of the survey over the next few months. And we will certainly be looking, I think, in a little more detail at the issues around, for example, social gradients, and also issues around disability, because again, that's something we don't have any real insight at the moment. So we'll be intrigued to understand how it's affecting different groups of people, and particularly as the economy and as sport starts opening up and so on. So.
Okay, and this is a very wide-reaching. It's an omnibus survey, so we've got 5,000 respondents back, so it's very valid information. One of the questions that struck me on it, and kind of in my own day to day as well, is that we are exercising that little bit more, but there's none of that social cohesion in terms of team sports, in terms of club activity and things like that. Is there a fear that now we've found there is so much more time in the 24 hours than we perhaps ever believed to be the case, that some of those habits of getting back involved in coaching and in supporting and in volunteering within your club, that there is a danger that might be a little bit more fragile when it comes back?
Yeah, I've heard that expressed by a number of individuals who would be very much in the space where they would be strongly committed volunteers and who have now sort of, as it were, embarked on a new journey at the moment. But I've heard them express a sense that they're enjoying their newfound freedom, and that, we don't know really what's going to happen. But I do think, we've got to have a little bit of a concern around that, because obviously from the point of view of club sport and children's sport in particular, the role of volunteers is absolutely paramount and crucial. So you would hope that somewhere along the line that we could have the best of both worlds, where we have that sort of, that social connectedness that you talk about, as well as obviously people getting their own activity as well. So it's going to be challenging. And again, as I say, what we're trying to do over the next few months is to try and understand how those behaviors will change, not just the active participation, but also the social participation, how that changes as these sports that were, I suppose, closed up to people are now beginning to open up again.
Okay. The beauty of research is that it gives us evidence on which to base decisions going forward. Where do you go now with this information? Does this feed into, in the very short term, into the expert group from the department who are looking at the reopening of sport, or is it something that's being used on a longer term basis, more towards that 10-year cycle of the national policy?
Yeah, I think it's feeding in at a number of different levels. For example, it's already fed in some of the issues around gender, has already fed into our women in sport group. So we've already fed material into their group. And I think they actually met today, or met yesterday rather, and obviously had an opportunity to consider and engage with the issues that we've raised. You're right, we've actually talked to our representatives on the expert group and said that we have that information, and obviously it's available to them. It's been fed into the National Physical Activity Plan group as well. So I see it in the short term, making sure that the information gets out there, because as much as anything else, actually being able to communicate that sort of good news, and that people out there are actually trying to do the best by themselves as well as by the country at large, and hope that feeds into the longer term planning, for example, around how we construct and develop our cities and our facilities and so on. And we know the sort of things that there is a demand for out there. We know the sort of activities that people want to engage in. So I think it's got a short term opportunity, as well as obviously I think longer term implications, which would certainly be dealing with. Yeah.
Great. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Peter. The one danger of giving us so much good information is that we always want more. When is the next wave likely to come through from this?
The next wave is we are trying to get a number of questions completed before the 8th of June, which is sort of next phase. And we're hoping to get enough that we can produce something of substance following that sort of. So we're talking maybe in a week or two after that. So that would be my hope at this stage, the middle of June. The middle to late part of June is perhaps when we next will be looking for something.
That's great. Well, helping us to guide on the next steps forward out of what has been an unprecedented period of time without sport, but with physical activity. So Peter Smyth from Sport Ireland, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Rob.